The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army. And now, ladies and gentlemen,
you're now about to witness the truth.
It's the Benjamin Dixon Show.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Benjamin Dixon Show. I am your host, Benjamin Dixon. It is Thursday, July 20th, 2017. Thanks for joining us a little bit late tonight. As always, we'd like to take our time to thank our patrons and all of our supporters, without whom this is not possible. And each and every one of you, even if you just share the content, however you do it, like, share, subscribe, whatever you do, we appreciate it. We are still going through a bit of a phase of transition at the Benjamin Dixon Show, so I thank you for indulging us with your patience. And we're just working to bring you a higher quality show. That's it. That's basically it. And let it be known that Benjamin Dixon does whatever he has to do. He does whatever he has to do, speaking of myself in the third person, to make sure that we keep progressing the show forward. And even if that means, a couple of setbacks. Last night, I was taken care of, I was covered by Brandon Sutton and the crew at the Discourse, and I can't thank them enough. I got sick at the last, literally 10 minutes before showtime, and all we had to do was hit up Brandon, and he pulled together the whole team to do a show last night within 10 minutes. So thanks so much. If you're not a patron of Brandon Sutton and the Discourse, you should be. I am. I'm a patron of the Discourse, so go to patreon.com. I'm not sure the exact URL, but search for the Discourse with Brandon Sutton, and I'm sure my producer David is going to throw in the chat room the link to become a supporter, because they really came through clutch, and they have great conversations every single time without fail. I like being around talented people. I like being around people even more talented than me, to be honest with you. I'd rather have people surrounding me that are better than me than me being the most talented person on my team, because if I'm the most talented person on my team, then I need some other people on my team. All right, I digress. I do believe our whole phone solution is ready to go. So 857-600-0518. If you want to weigh in on the discussion, join the conversation. I will be joined by Salam Morcos, and actually I'm going to reach out to him, and we're going to be speaking about the article that we've been trying to get to all week. We've been trying to discuss the article that he and Jami Miller wrote over at ProgressiveArmy.com, discussing the water crisis and the electricity crisis in Gaza. I'm going to, okay, thank you. I'm just getting some updates here. I'm going to be joined by him and to discuss this article very shortly. Also, we'll be discussing this guy who ran for mayor in St. Petersburg, Florida. Now, I'm from Florida, and I know a lot about Florida. But there's a man named Paul Jami who ran for mayor in St. Petersburg, Florida, and what he had to say was, how can I put it? One of the most racist tirades that you're going to hear from someone running for office ever. That's all I can say. That's what I know. And so we're going to discuss that briefly, and along with other things that's happening in the news. Before I start, or as I begin, I want to start with Donald Trump. How can I say this? It shouldn't be a surprise to anyone that Donald Trump is no good or will undermine his own campaign, undermine his own players, undermine his own team. But today was spectacular. Today was spectacular because Donald Trump literally, well, not today. It came out today in the New York Times article about Donald Trump, audio of Donald Trump basically saying, had he known that Jeff Sessions would have recused himself, he would have picked someone else. Now, when I first saw the headline, I'm like, okay, somebody's taking this out of context. This is clickbait. Or this is fake news, because he couldn't possibly be this dumb to say these exact words. But the president of the United States is actually that dumb to say those exact words, He said, had he known that Jeff Sessions was going to recuse himself, he would have picked someone else. Ironically, it still goes to show you exactly how much Donald Trump can say and get away with before people actually have enough of him. Because this to me translates as I had every intention to use Jeff Sessions as a way of blocking any investigation into the Russia collusion. That's how I read it. I mean, that's what else is he trying to convey there? Like, what else could Donald Trump possibly be saying there other than to say that had he not, there we go, that's what I want. What else is he trying to say there? Except for had he known Jeff Sessions wouldn't have had the temerity to stick it through and not recuse himself, that he would have picked someone else. And that he had the full expectation that Jeff Sessions was going to be a buffer for him in the role of the Attorney General's office. That's what stands out. And, you know, Donald Trump thinks he's smart, right? He knows all the big words. But he reveals so much with just such a simple question, asking him how he felt about Jeff Sessions' recusal. And he said he felt that this was unfair to the president. You know, it shows you that he has an expectation of the people who are working with him. He has an expectation that they are there solely to serve his purposes. That's what he's saying. He's saying that he has a full expectation that there's nothing more important in this role. There's nothing more important to him than to have an attorney general to work on behalf of the Russia investigation, but not everything else that the attorney general is supposed to do. So in other words, yeah, I mean, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I want to make sure that I'm saying it as succinctly as possible. Donald Trump, by saying he would have picked someone else, says that nothing else mattered to him in the role of an attorney general than someone who was going to stand by his side throughout the Russia investigation. Now, this in and of itself is not an admission of guilt, but how many times are we going to have to see smoke before we say, okay, there's something there? I was discussing the other night, I'm pretty sure I discussed the other night, the story of N. Bremer, the political scientist and the president of the Eurasia Group, who reported on Donald Trump having met with Vladimir Putin for a second time. And the reason I'm bringing that up in the context of the conversation with Jeff Sessions is that N. Bremer has been a vocal critic of the Russia narrative or the absence of evidence. And he still, even now, still suggests that there's not enough evidence to prove collusion. But despite his own skepticism, he agrees that the Trump administration has entirely lied entirely too much, and that at some point you have to look at what's going on and say, where there's enough smoke, there has to be a fire. I don't really know. I mean, the reason I'm hesitating is because it's really one of those things now that either you want to see it or you don't want to see it. You know, I'm the number one person throughout this entire process, not the number one person, but one of the leading people to say we need evidence. I want to see evidence before we go any further. And as we started to get evidence by proxy of the Donald Trump Jr. emails last week, and now we're getting evidence out of Donald Trump's own mouth saying that had he known Jeff Sessions was going to recuse himself, he would have never picked Jeff Sessions. I mean, at this point, I think it's safe to say that there is something there. Now, to what extent, that's the question. What can be proven, that's the question. What actually is a violation of the letter of the law, those are the important questions. One last thing I'll say about this before I'm joined by Salam Morcos is the fact that there's still any leader, any person calling for war around this topic needs to be excommunicated from the political class, from the commentary class, just across the board. And I say that in the context of this because reciprocity Yes, but a measured response. The last thing that we need is for people to use their platforms. I think it was Paul Bigoted, his name just came back to me, basically saying that we need to take this evidence and use it to figure out how we're going to strike Russia. No, not at all. So there's levels of reasonableness in this. And it's reasonable for us to say that looking at the evidence that has come out from Donald Trump Jr. and the words that are coming out of Donald Trump's mouth, Sr., his mouth himself, it's reasonable for us to say, okay, there's something here. Let's see where the investigation goes and let it go wherever it leads. But it's also reasonable for us to say there's no reason whatsoever for someone to be talking about an armed conflict with Russia over this. There should be something done, but an armed conflict with Russia, Paul Bigoted spouting that type of rhetoric really needs to be slapped in no uncertain terms. All right. I have been joined by Salam Morcos. If we can unmute that line. I want to talk to him about an article that he and Jami Miller wrote for Progressive Army. And as I read the article and began seeing how dire the circumstances are and how the situation is, I've been wanting to talk about this all week long. Salam, let me make sure that you can hear me okay. Are you there?
Yep.
Awesome.
Hi, Ben. How are you doing?
Thanks so much for joining me. Could you start off just telling the audience about what you and Jami Miller found and what you wrote about over at progressivearmy.com?
Thanks, Ben. The article that you're referring to is reference the dire situation as you just described it in Gaza. I just found not too long ago that it turns out that Gaza is currently facing a near or virtual blackout. They are, according to some reports, they have virtually no electricity. Sometimes they have electricity for just 1 hour a day, and some reports 2 hours a day. And what this does is that it means that they are living in complete darkness. They have to use primitive tools such as, using candles to study for school or things of that kind. But it also means that they have no access to water because they rely on electricity so that they are able to pump water into their tanks. And currently they don't have the ability to do so. So it's a humanitarian crisis. And on top of that, the international committee has given it has completely ignored the situation, has focused on other issues. But when it comes to this humanitarian crisis, I hardly heard about it in the mainstream media.
Yeah, that's something that we run into so many times when it comes to this issue, right? We see a media blackout, and if we hear anything, we often hear a spin that rivals something out of 1984. But I want to just kind of reiterate what you're saying. You're saying that there's no electricity down to just 1 hour a day, and because of that, that puts a limitation on the water that they can get. That puts a limitation on their ability to for anyone to do anything outside of using candlelight. Hospitals use power generators, which relies on fuel and diesel instead of electricity, and also the fuel being scarce, the generators rather being scarce and very expensive. I mean, this is almost a complete. I think I saw someone describe it as taking Gaza back to the Dark Ages, to the Middle Ages I mean, what is the political goal behind this move?
Well, the political goal behind it, if you look at what caused this situation to happen, I mean, in Gaza, they always had issues of shortages. They always had situations where the electricity is intermittent, never at this scale, however. And the reason for this dire state is because the Palestinian administration in the West Bank has asked Israel to reduce the power supply by 40%, which is something that Israel agreed to. And Israel is the main supplier of energy and electricity over to Gaza, and as a result, this happened. And in fact, even this Sunday, last Sunday, the cabinet has agreed to reduce the power supply even further. So which means that what we are seeing currently, which is already dire, is going to be just worse.
Wow. Wow. So what are...
I want to also give this, like this is personal to me because I lived in a similar situation. You see, I'm originally from Iraq, and I lived during the Iraq War. And even though I was like middle upper class, so we had access to generators, we had access to, I mean, we had more access than the average Iraqi person. But I can tell you, during the war, it was very difficult without electricity. I mean, I remember the days where we had to struggle, go over very long lines just so that we can collect water. And to imagine that currently in 2017, in a situation where it's not war, they are not living in an official war, that this happens as a deliberate action by what's supposed to be its friend or its ally, other than the political challenge, other than the political standoff between Hamas and the Palestinian administration. I mean, it's from my perspective, this is a humanitarian crisis. It doesn't matter what someone's position about Hamas is, because those Hamas leaders have access to generators, according to some reports. So this is punishing the 1.8 million people living in that very highly populated Gaza Strip. So that's why when I read this, it was when I found out about these reports, it was very personal to me.
Absolutely, absolutely. So in terms of solutions, or in terms of how we can make an impact, like what do we do here? Like, I mean, knowing about it obviously is the first step, awareness, but what have we found? Who's fighting back against this?
So unfortunately, there is, as I said, because of the media blackout, there has been very little, there hasn't been a big reply to or a condemnation of these actions. However, the United Nations has issued condemnation of this action and has called for increasing the power supply. But but based on the recent actions, and I'll be completely honest with you, it doesn't appear that this situation will be resolved anytime soon, because this is based on political actions. The only way that this can change if there is enough awareness on the international community, to the point where there will be a type of shaming. There has to be a shaming for all the, what I call all the four actors that are directly or indirectly are to blame, and they are the Palestinian administration, Israel, Egypt as well, and Hamas. They all need to end their, they need to separate their political differences, and they need to remember that when it comes to the people who are suffering, where there is an extremely large percentage of unemployment and suffrage already in the area, you should not deprive them from what I call basic humanitarian human rights. That's how I see it.
Salam, thanks so much for taking your time tonight and joining me. The article is over on progressivearmy.com by Salam Morcos and Jami Miller, highlighting what we can call an atrocity, like we can, especially affecting 1.8 million lives. Thanks so much for joining me to discuss this.
Thank you, Ben.
857-600-0518 if you want to weigh in on the conversation. We do see this often. Sometimes people say that there's a media blackout, and usually that translates into, or sometimes it translates into, they're just not getting the kind of coverage that they want, or the amount of coverage. But really, with a story like this, I've not seen it on any mainstream outlet whatsoever. At all. So there is a complete media, a true blackout with regards to this issue. And I want to thank them, Jami and Salam, for bringing attention to it, particularly for the Progressive Army. 857-600-0518 if you want to weigh in on the discussion. All right. A lot happening in the news. Let's go to this guy in Florida. It's Paul Bigoted. Paul Bigoted. He is Are we back? We're back. Good. We're back. How many people did we lose? Oh, we actually gained people. I guess everybody wanted to see what was this guy just staring in the camera for. All right. We're back. Technical difficulty. Microphone went out, but now you can hear me, right? Everybody's good? Yeah. Hey, Nick Knight in the chat room said, tech magic right in front. Hanging, just don't want Ben to get wound up. Deliver us good. Deliver us a good rant. Hey, I don't freak out. Listen, I don't freak out when stuff doesn't work right. I ask any producer who've ever worked with me. I don't ever freak out when stuff doesn't work right. Okay, let's go back and let's start at the top. I'm talking about this guy, Paul Jami, out of St. Petersburg, Florida. And he is a candidate for mayor. And it's amazing that he is able to run for mayor after espousing this level of bigotry that I'm going to attempt to play for you in a moment. But I want you to hear the level of open bigotry that is now acceptable in the United States. And I want to be clear that I say this precisely. It's not that this is new. It's not that this level of bigotry is new. It's not that this level of racism is new. In fact, it has always been here. But there was a brief moment in time in American history where, recent American history, where you couldn't run for dog catcher, let alone mayor of a city, espousing this type of rhetoric. And now we've seen such a shift in the American discourse. Quite honestly, the overall American discourse, we've seen quite a shift that now you can say the wildest, most racist thing and run for office and be given a platform and have the expectation to be given a platform. And I think that might be the part that kind of drives me the wildest, is that not only are you given a platform, but these people, these racists, these white supremacists have the expectation that they are owed that platform, and that if someone doesn't give them a platform to espouse their racist rhetoric, then they are losing their First Amendment right. There was a time where it wasn't like that, just in recent history, not in the overall arching American history. Throughout all the overall arch of American history, this is pretty status quo. I think we can all agree there that for most of American history, bigotry and racism was the mainstream. And I'm reminded of the 1920 Scopes trial. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because there was a level of evangelical religiosity that was rejecting all forms of science. And what happened was it got exposed during this trial. It got exposed to the point where the entire nation was able to see the willful ignorance of an entire group of people and their rejection of science. And the exposure embarrassed them so much, at least in the broader discourse, that sect of Christianity had to go into seclusion. It never went away. It never fully disappeared. It just went into seclusion. Same thing with open bigotry. We had a moment, a brief moment in the public discourse, in the broader public discourse, where someone like this guy from St. Petersburg, Florida, would have been shamed out of the mainstream, shamed to the point where he would not be able to run for mayor, not because constitutionally or he was rejected legally, but because he would know that his type is not welcome here. Well, apparently, tide has turned back in the opposite direction. I'm going to give this a shot, and let's see if we can hear this. And actually, do me a favor to my producer, unmute the channel 2, the same line for the phone audio. Give me a thumbs up. Is it ready?
Mr. Neville, you and your people, you talk about reparations. The reparations that you talk about, Mr. Neville, your people already got your reparations. Your reparations came in the form of a man named Barack Obama.
Please hold your response.
My advice to you, if you don't like it here in America, planes leave every hour from Tampa Airport. Go back to Africa. Go back to Africa. Go back.
Side of the Ricks.
All right. So two things. I mean, it's not even really worth discussing the substance of what he said because it's without substance. But just to make sure that we highlight what this fool said. This fool said, your reparations came in the form of Barack Obama. Reparations for black people, your people, your people. Your people want reparations. You got reparations, he said. And you got it from Barack Obama becoming president. In other words, us electing a single black man should fix everything. Everything that was ever wrong in American history with regard to people of color. We got us a black president, so everything's fine. Then the very next thing out of his mouth is, if you don't like what happens here in America, go back to Africa. There's an airport, planes leave every hour, go back to Africa. Now this fool is running for this is his third time running for mayor, so he's a habitual candidate and a habitual loser. But I bring it up because the tide is turning in America. This type of vitriol is becoming mainstream. Again, it never went anywhere. No one's arguing that it went anywhere. But I'm sorry, I don't want my racism out loud, brash, and running for office. I don't want the bigotry that's going to always see. I don't believe that we're going to ever get rid of bigotry in America. We're never going to get rid of racism in America. But we can get to a point where fools like this are not welcome into the mainstream of the public square in the public discourse. That's the best we can hope for. That's the best we can hope for because because of their freedoms, right? If you want to talk about freedoms and the First Amendment, you have the freedom to be a bigot. You have the freedom to be a piece of shit. This totally can be that. But that doesn't mean that we have to give you a platform to espouse this across the nation. And what's happening now is that we've seen a dramatic shift in the number of people. The case in point, Richard Spencer, the neo-Nazi, the white nationalist, alt-right, whatever you want to call him, Richard Spencer got his platform as a result of Donald Trump winning the White House. That's how Richard Spencer got his platform. And it signifies a turn in the American discourse where now two things are more possible than ever before. Number one, you can be loud and proud with your bigotry. You can be louder and prouder with your racism than you can being a minority or a marginalized group. Every Tom, Dick, and redneck in America feels like this is their time because their man is in the White House. Their guy is in the White House, and they can say and do whatever. I mean, this is their day. It's time. It's the South will rise again, or in this case, the bigots will rise again. That's number one. So the bigots have their heyday now because of Donald Trump and Donald Trump's open bigotry. And because that's in the White House, all of the people who were relegated to the dregs of society now feel like they could be out loud and proud. The second thing that's happened is because of how completely and utterly feckless the president of the United States is. He is the quintessential example of mediocrity that has been promoted onto us, propelled onto us because of wealth. But he is still highly mediocre, highly incompetent. He is grossly incompetent. And because of that, you have people who are, everybody thinks they can run for office now. Sure, fine. Technically, everybody can run for office, fine. But I do want someone with enough working digits to be able to read. I want someone with enough working digits to be able to lead. I want someone with enough functioning, with enough level of intelligence to understand what's going on in the world and to be able to put themselves in the context of what's happening in the world. But I digress. But because Donald Trump is the level of incompetence or demonstrates the level of incompetence that he does, even the town idiot, which this Paul Jami is, even they feel like they can aspire to something more than being the village idiot. And so this guy, there's nothing of substance to discuss in terms of what he said. But I will point out that this guy has been arrested for assaulting, for a confrontation rather, at KFC because they got his chicken order wrong while he was running for mayor. This wasn't when he was a teenager. I didn't look up anything from when he was a teenager. I just looked up what he did since he's been running for mayor. He's been arrested for assaulting people at a KFC. He's also been arrested for felony elder abuse because his mother, 87-year-old mother, had to be checked into a hospital in intensive care because of bed sores. He neglected his own mother so much so that she had to go into intensive care for bed sores. And I point this out because how can you be a white supremacist and nothing about you is fucking supreme? Nothing. Nothing is supreme about you. Not your level of intellect, not your presentation, not your home life, just nothing about you is supreme. And yet they feel like they have the standing to actually talk down to the black community. That's what I never ceases to amaze me. I'm like, if you're going to be a white supremacist, at least work on your supremacy first. Like, be more supreme than Sideshow Bob. Be more supreme than the local joker, the village idiot. But yet you want to tell us and lecture black people, and marginalized people, people of color, women, minorities, the LGBTQ. You want to lecture us about our lives. I don't even know. I mean, you know what? There is nothing else to say about this except for the fact that as long as we have a president in the White House who continuously demonstrates a level of ignorance that dumb people can aspire to, I just don't have any other way to say it tonight. I don't. I mean, I mean, maybe it's good. Let me be nice. Everybody likes me to be nice. Maybe it's good. Maybe it's good for the village idiot to aspire to something more. Maybe it's good for them to look and see them, because we say this all the time about black people. It's like, black people, we want to see ourselves represented. We want to see ourselves represented on TV. We want to see a representation of blackness in office. We want to see a representation of blackness in our movies. So maybe idiots in town, village idiots need to see themselves represented, just not in the White House. But now they have the greatest representative of them all representing them in the White House. So they can aspire to more. Be all that you can be, Paul Jami. Be all that you can be. But anyway, let me leave this man alone. There's no reason for me to. His life is sad enough for me not to. But I'm curious as to see what St. Petersburg, Florida is going to do. I know Florida well. And St. Petersburg is pretty diverse. Maybe this is why he's run for office 3 times and he's never won. That could be it. But we'll see. We'll see if exactly if he gets any votes. If this man gets more than 2 votes, him, his own, and his mother, if she's still living, if he gets more than 2 votes, there's something wrong in St. Petersburg, Florida. But it is Florida, so I digress. Caller, producer, open up the line for the caller. Caller, you're live on the air. What is your name, comment, and/or question?
Yo, what's up, man? This is Q.
Q, how's it going, man? Hey, my brother, how's it going?
How's it going, brother? Man, I had one quick question, man.
For sure.
When we talk about the discourse in the United States, and we discussing how people who prescribe to white supremacy, racism, bigotry, and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Answer me this one question, and I just want to pick your brain on this. You see shows like Bill Maher, you see shows on MSNBC, CNN, town halls across the United States, and they allow these people to come on their shows under the guise of, we're going to start a dialogue.
Yep.
Now, they allow these people with no resistance to come to college campuses, pay them all their speaking fees, and it's no problem. But the moment that we suggest perhaps we should have people on the left come and give their thoughts. It always blows my mind, man, how Bill Maher has never had any woman, like a black trans communist. There's never been an indigenous democratic socialist. There's never been, an Asian socialist. They don't allow representation of the left by people of color to come in and give their opinion, to shift the Overton window, to shift the discourse. And I just want to know, at what point do you think that this will become acceptable, if it will at all? Or how do we break this door down to allowing this to become the norm, to let people on the left of all ideologies come on and shift the discourse?
Hey, that's a great question, man. Thanks so much for it. I appreciate the call. I think you point out something there that's critical for us to discuss. I don't care if it's every single day, but it needs to be discussed every single day. If we look at the video of Paul Jami and the racism that he espoused at a debate, I didn't even give the proper context. He was at a public debate for the seat of the mayor, for the mayoral seat. And the racism that he espoused was given a platform that was unchallenged, except for some hecklers from the audience or protesters from the audience. Had a socialist, even a democratic socialist, but let's just say a socialist, got up there and said that we need to nationalize the banks, or we need to nationalize all of our healthcare system. We need a single payer. If we anything remotely to the left of the Democratic Party, anything further to the left than Hillary Clinton, we would have heard about this all over the nation. We would have heard an outcry from everybody, from establishment Democrats to the Republican Party. People would have disavowed, like people who don't have anything to do with the person would have got on TV just so they could disavow and say, oh, this is a capitalist country, right? And this speaks to what you're saying here, Q. It speaks to the fact that the Overton window has been shifted so far to the right in America that a dude like Paul Jami can get a platform to espouse his hatred, racism, but anyone who espouses anything as far as an egalitarian society or even single payer would be lambasted in the media nonstop. I said it a couple of weeks ago. This is how far we are in America, where someone like Richard Spencer can get on CNN before someone as Cornel West. And I use him as an example because Cornel West really isn't as far to the left as America gets. There's just a matter of fact, actually, let me roll that back. I'm going to show you how bad that example really. Richard Spencer can get a platform on CNN and get a feature on CNN, and yet they act like they're too afraid of DeRay McKesson. Like DeRay McKesson is too radical. This is how far and how skewed our political discourse is in the United States of America. And everyone in the media is complicit with it. All the mainstream. You mentioned Bill Maher. Of course, Bill Maher. I remember when I was in college. Here's where the suppression of speech at universities actually exists. When I was in college, you could not get someone who was pro-Palestinian on your campus to speak without them being shut down by a pro-Israel lobby or anti-Palestinian protesters. I remember time after time after time at the university that I attended, them trying to book someone to come and speak and be pro-Palestinian. And time again, you had protesters shutting it down. You had university leaders shutting it down. You had activists, anti-Israeli, anti-Palestinian activists shut it down. You had anti-Palestinian special interest groups protesting it and shutting it down. And time again, you see that voice was suppressed all throughout my time in college. My time in college. And now it seems like all of a sudden everyone gets they're woke now. Everybody is woke because, people are trying to stop a Nazi from speaking. Now all of a sudden it's about free speech when, so many years ago, It was about suppressing the speech of anyone who would speak positively of Palestine or have any critique whatsoever of Israel. I mean, even the most modest critique of Israel was suppressed. So I really, all of these free speech warriors now, while it sounds good, where the hell were you? Well, hell, I mean, I might as well say it like 15 years ago. Where were you 15 years ago when not a single pro-Palestinian speaker could come to a college campus? And it's similar now. You can barely do it now. You can barely be pro-black and get a platform now. College professors who speak out against white supremacy get reprimanded. Where are the free speech warriors there? And that speaks to exactly what the caller just represented or spoke of on the call. It's that the Overton window, the discourse in the United States has been shifted so far in a particular direction that anything outside of anything, I swear, anything DeRay McKesson and to the left is considered extreme and won't be given a platform. And I mean, I'm far more of a revolutionary than DeRay McKesson will ever be. And I've got some comrades who look at me and say, Ben is milquetoast as they come. Ben is an institutionalist. Ben is, you know, I've got some friends to the left of me that I don't even know that I can actually hang out with because they're so revolutionary. But they look at my politics and say, Ben ain't about that revolution. I look at DeRay's politics and say, DeRay's not about that revolution. But they look at DeRay's politics and say, oh, DeRay is a radical, communist, socialist, Black Lives Matter, militant, white genocidal. And that's how they control the discourse. They control the discourse by making you afraid of someone who's, Cory Booker. DeRay McKesson and Cory Booker are probably cut from the same cloth. But they want you to be so afraid of anything that is too, hell, I can't even think. I mean, they want you to be afraid of Hillary Clinton. Can we just, you know? And I think this is what bothers me the most about the Democrats, because they play the same game and try to make you afraid of anything to the left of them, while the Republican Party and conservatives make the nation and the world afraid of the Democrats. I mean, you have two parties who economically are pretty much in lockstep, with the exception of Donald Trump's idiocy and with the exception of a couple of percentage points on tax, on the top marginal tax rates. Economically, these two parties are pretty much the same. You know, the Democrats want to moderate some of the excesses of capitalism just a little bit. Republicans say, F that, let it all hang out. But both of them are pro-capitalist, pro-business parties, and they only vary by in the margin of error on tax policy. That's how modestly they vary in tax policy. But the Republicans have successfully convinced half of America that Hillary Clinton, matter of fact, I just saw today, Bill Clinton just came out with something called a new for-profit company called Inclusive Capitalism. I believe that's the title. It's a for-profit company, and it's all about spreading inclusive capitalism. Might as well call it intersectional capitalism, right? So that's where he and his wife are. That's where they have always been. They are pro-capitalist. There's nothing revolutionary about the economic policies of the Clintons whatsoever. But you have half of America convinced that that Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton are somehow revolutionary socialists. And by making you afraid of them, you don't even know what exists to the left of them in America anymore. Not at all. And it's all intentional. All right. One last thing I want to talk about. I know we started late and I know we're hanging out late, but there's one other story, and I'm reminded of it because of the conversation of Palestine and Israel. There is a law being presented and proposed by 45 senators, a bipartisan coalition of senators. And it is basically stating that if you participate in a boycott of Israel, or if you inquire about a boycott of Israel, that you could face up to $1 million in fines and 20 years in prison. It is It sounds absurd, but it is there. And it's a bipartisan coalition of senators, 30 of whom are Republicans, 15 are Democrats, including Chuck Schumer, Senator Blumenthal, and several others. And it speaks exactly to what the last caller pointed out and what I elaborated on. It speaks to the fact that there's a certain worldview that is enshrined in the American discourse, that anything outside of that worldview is punished, and punished in the most draconian sense. This law is unconstitutional, and it's very likely, if it does pass, it will be signed by someone like Donald Trump, and depending on the makeup of the Supreme Court would determine whether or not it stands judicial review. But this reminds me, or this is lockstep with a law, or at least a statement that Andrew Cuomo, governor of New York, actually proposed, I believe, a summer ago. And it was essentially a proposal that the city of New York, or the state of New York rather, would boycott anyone who boycotted Israel. I mean, I want to pause for dramatic effect so you can let that sink in. So essentially what's happening is, if you exercise your First Amendment right to speak out and to boycott and protest the actions of Israel, particularly with regard to Palestine, the military occupation, the seizure of land, if you protest or if you boycott Israel, and this law passes, you could be faced with up to 20 years in prison and up to a $1 million fine. This is a bipartisan bill, which shows you the strength of the Israel lobby in the United States of America. You want to see this? Well, maybe I shouldn't touch the third rail. But the strength of the Israel lobby is a force to be reckoned with. To the point where it is almost impossible to find a conversation that has any reasonable critique of Israel. And now we've gotten to the point where not only can you not give a critique of Israel without being lambasted, if you dare cross the threshold of being a person who wants to boycott, divest, or sanction Israel, then you could be imprisoned and fined. Now, I spoke with Rabbi from the Jewish Voice of Peace today, and I also spoke with a member of the ACLU. He is a consultant with the ACLU on the First Amendment. And they wanted to be sure that we conveyed this, that most of this is an attempt to instill fear in people who would protest Israel, who would boycott Israel, who would demand that we divest from Israel. And they said that because they wanted to be clear that, one, that the ACLU is fighting on behalf of everyone's ability to protest, boycott, sanction, and divest, as well as there are people from the Jewish community who see this for what it is. And a lot of times we speak of Israeli-Palestinian conflict and questions about them, and we speak of it almost as if the Jewish community is a monolith and they all have one worldview, and that's very, very incorrect. The fact of the matter is that you have a left, you have a right, you have a center in the conversation with regard to Israel. And there are a lot of outspoken Israelis as well as Israeli Americans who will speak to how draconian this law really is. And they will speak to the realities of the military occupation. And they would speak to the realities of the apartheid that is going on. Part of the problem is, though, is that there is a strong stranglehold that the right of the Israeli conversation the right side of the Israeli discourse has on American politics. And because of the grip of the stranglehold that it has on American politics, we see this type of legislation come with a bipartisan consensus. 45 co-sponsors, 30 Republican, 15 Democrat, all on behalf of a Now, I mean, really, it is unconstitutional. But I can't think, and I was discussing this today. There's a clip on YouTube of me discussing it with the consultant for the ACLU and the one of the rabbis from Jewish Voice for Peace. And as we're discussing it, it really, we could not find a parallel in American history where this type of action had this type of support. There's some examples from the 80s that they gave with Ronald Reagan, but in terms of such a unified voice of bipartisanship as co-sponsors for a bill that is this unconstitutional, we haven't seen it in modern American history. And that really should alarm every single one of us. I believe the bill is S-720, Senate Bill 720, and the purpose of it is twofold. Particularly, they want to have a chilling effect on any critic of Israel. And this is the last thing I'm going to say about this, and we're going to get out of here, producer, Mr. Producer, sir. The last thing I'm going to say about this is, if we cannot give a reasonable critique, not only of Israel, but hell, of America, of the Democratic Party, of the Republican Party, anyone who requires that you have absolute loyalty and allegiance to any group, not only are they dictatorial and authoritarian, but they are doing a disservice to the very people they seek to help. But they don't care about that. I'm not really concerned about that so much as the fact that we, in this American discourse, in our political discourse, not just American, in international discourse, anyone who tells you that you can't criticize someone, they need to be the people you oppose. These 45 senators who have co-signed this, or who have co-sponsored this, they are our political rivals, and I don't care if they're Democrat or Republican, because they are saying that we should not have the ability to critique a foreign nation. Next, they're going to say you should not have the ability to critique the United States of America. Next, they're going to say you should not have the ability to critique the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. No one is above critique. No nation is above critique. It may come as a shock to some of you, but the United States of America has screwed up so many times that it is only reasonable for us to critique the United States of America. And this may make people call me anti-Semitic, but there are issues with regard to Israel wherein we must give a valid and robust critique without fear of going to jail, of being fined $1 million. And what they're trying to do is to create a baseline wherein anyone who says anything negative or anything that could be misconstrued as negative is automatically labeled anti-Semitic, or in the case of the United States, automatically labeled as unpatriotic and automatically labeled as an enemy. And to that we say, let's do it. That's fine. Call us what you want. But what you won't do is silence us. Folks, have a great weekend. I will see you on Monday, patrons. I will see you tomorrow morning for our Friday broadcast. And the rest of you have a great weekend. We'll see you on Monday. Let's get out of here.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog, join the Progressive Army, and support The Benjamin Dixon Show. It's Ben Dixon! If you like this episode, be sure to share, like, and subscribe.
Consider becoming a Patreon. Go to www.patreon.com/the BPD Show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show.